Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Happy Sunday, yo. I don't know where yo came from, but happy Sunday. This live today is called The Pain of Growth. So we're going to be exploring why healing feels so lonely. If this is your first time joining me, my name is Letitia. I am the Survival Made Disruptor. I am a trauma recovery mentor that facilitates disruptive, unapologetic transformations for high achieving women who are ready to exit survival mode and take radical ownership of their lives and their growth. And I love having conversations about the residual impact of trauma. I love having conversations about working through trauma and getting out of survival mode. And like I said, today's live is all about the pain of growth. So, welcome to this conversation. It's going to get real. It's going to get real quick. We're diving into the part of healing that no one puts on Instagram or, you know, people don't have these conversations. And I really want to bring it to the forefront to help you as you focus on your healing beyond the trauma that you've experienced. And that is the grief of becoming someone your old life doesn't recognize. Because I don't care how many affirmations you speak and how many mood boards you build, healing will cost you something. And one of the first things that it costs us is our company. So if you've been feeling lonely lately, if you've been wondering why the more you grow, the more isolated you feel, this conversation is for you. And if you're joining me, just pop a hello in the chat so I know that you're there. If you have any questions as I am going through this conversation, be sure to put it in the chat so that I can address it. Um, we're going to disrupt the lie that healing is supposed to be good all the time. It's supposed to feel good all the time because it doesn't. And the loneliness, that's a sign. That's not a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's actually a sign that you're shedding what is no longer aligned. So let's talk about it. When you first step out of survival mode, when you first start performing strength, people get confused. Some will look at you sideways, others will straight up reject you, and some will try to pull you back to the version of you that made them comfortable. Because let's be honest, most of us were loved for who we were pretending to be. When we spend so much time pretending to be okay, we were praised for the fact that we kept going. We were praised for being strong when we really meant what but what they really meant is that they were glad that we were silent. We were rewarded for being loyal when that meant we were self-abandoning ourselves. We have been accepted as long as we didn't ask for too much. But the moment you start healing, the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you start setting boundaries and choosing rest and demanding reciprocity, you become too much real quick. Healing strips the performance, and without the performance, you see who loved the mask, not the woman behind it. So yeah, healing feels lonely, not because you're unloved, but because you're becoming undeniable. And not everyone can handle that. So first let's talk about survival bonds. These are relationships that you form when you're in pain, in trauma, stuck in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state. It's when you trauma bond with someone because you both understand dysfunction better than you understand peace. You have have a friend that only checks on you when things are going bad. You bond over breakups and gossips or complaining about the chaos. But the minute you start healing, that connection feels off. And you're probably wondering why. That's because survival created that bond. And when you start healing, healing threatens that bond. Some of us are grieving friendships that were never rooted in love. They were rooted in pain. They were built on trauma, not truth. You bonded over your wounds, not your values. And the deeper truth to that is some of us kept people around not because we needed them, but because we were afraid of who we'll be without them. And I know if you're listening to this, you felt that. Like there are so many people in my life that I had to learn to let go of as I grew because, we were no longer aligned. And oftentimes there's relationships had me feeling bad about myself. And we're going to go into that a bit different a bit more later. But that's where codependency sneaks in. That's where toxic loyalty shows up. Staying connected to people out of obligation, out of guilt, out of history is not alignment. So let me be clear. You don't owe anyone lifelong access to you because you survived something together. You don't have to keep playing the same role in a friendship just to keep the peace. You don't need to shrink back just because your growth makes someone else insecure. So let me talk about the version of you. So let me talk to the version of you that has been told you've changed. You think you're better than us now, or you're acting differently. Yes, you have changed. Yes, you are acting different because the girl was never to stay the same. The girl of life and healing and growth is to evolve. You've changed is often said by people who are mad that they can no longer control you. When people say that, what they're really saying is, you're no longer dimming yourself for me. You're no longer prioritizing my comfort over your healing. You're no longer pretending you're okay just to keep me company. They're mourning the version of you that made their dysfunction feel normal. And now that you've stepped into more, they don't know what to do with you. So, what do? They project, they guilt trip, and they gaslight. Don't go back to who you were just to keep people around. Don't dull your light because your shine reveals where they've chosen not to grow. Because the truth is, healing will shrink your circle before it expands your life. And what you will lose in quantity, you'll gain in quality. So if you've been sitting in a space of loneliness, of wondering if you're doing this whole healing thing wrong because it feels heavy, I promise you, you're not. This is the in between. This is the bridge between survival and selfhood. And the other side of this grief is freedom. So, we're going to talk about how guilt keeps you tethered to people who don't serve who you are becoming, and how you can finally let that shit go. But for now, I want you to let this land. You're not lonely because you are unworthy. You're lonely because you're no longer entertaining what has normally or has never been worthy of you, right? I'll say that again because I kind of got tripped up on my words. You are not lonely because you're unworthy. You're lonely because you are no longer entertaining what was never worthy of you. So now that we've talked about the loneliness that comes with growth, let's talk about the guilt that tries to pull you backwards. Because here's the truth. Most of us women don't stay stuck because we lack courage. We stay stuck because we carry guilt like a damn backpack. Guilt for having boundaries, guilt for resting, guilt for saying no, guilt for wanting more than we were handed. But the deepest guilt, the one that keeps us walking in circles, is the guilt of leaving people behind. Um, there were several times on my journey that I had to walk away from long term friendships and long term relationships. And it took me a long time to get there because I felt guilty about it, right? I felt bad for calling someone my friend for 25 years and then recognizing that, hey, we are no longer on the same field. Like, we're not even playing the same game anymore. And why should I say stuck to this person simply because, of loyalty? Like, it's not helping me move forward. So that anchor is what keeps me stuck. Keeping it staying in environments is what keeps us stuck. So let's unpack this further. Here are some red flags that we often ignore. We stay in friendships that drain us because we've been through a lot. I was just talking about that. 25 years this girl's been my friend. Surely I should stay there. You keep showing up from family members who have constantly disrespected your boundaries because they raised you, right? I've walked away from my father. I don't have a relationship with my father because of how I felt tethered to toxicity. And people didn't understand it. But in order for me to grow and evolve, I couldn't stay in those spaces, right? You keep people on your calendar out of obligation, not desire. You're showing up to things just because you think you should, rather than go into things that you really want to go to. You feel responsible for someone else's healing, someone else's growth, someone else's happiness. Listen, I was married to a recovering addict. I felt responsible for his sobriety, and that kept me stuck for a very long time. You don't speak your truth because you're afraid it would make somebody else uncomfortable. How many of us have kept silent, not speaking up because you didn't want to rock the boat? You walk on eggshells, right? These are all red flags. Or you say yes with a smile and then later you're dying inside. Does that sound familiar? Because I know it sounds familiar for me. So let me ask you this. When was the last time that you chose you fully, freely, and without apology? If it's been a while, it's likely because guilt has been in the driver's seat, and guilt will have you over explaining, over compensating, over committing to relationships that should have ended three growth cycles ago. So, as you're listening to this, I always encourage um, my clients, anybody that I'm training, to stop for a moment, and I like to give journal prompts. So I want you to write this down if you have some paper and perhaps go back to it later. Who in my life am I trying to save? And why do I think it's my job? I remember a couple of years ago, my mama said to me, "You really think you're Captain Save who?" And when she said it, it was like, what are you talking about? But I was that person who was always trying to save everybody. And part of my healing was recognizing that I had to save myself first. I had to put my oxygen mask on first. And as a result, I lost people because I had prioritized so many I had on my own interests. And I want you to perhaps ruminate on this. Who in your life are you trying to save? And why do you think it's your job? Why is it your priority to save everyone else? So I want to get into the tug of war between loyalty and liberation, right? Like, we are taught loyalty at all costs, right? We're taught to be loyal to our family first, blood is thicker than water. We are expected to be loyal to our friends. We're often expected to be loyal to the struggle, loyal to the systems that never gave a damn about our well being. But loyalty without boundaries is just bondage. Hello, hello. Thank you for joining. So, I'm going to say that again. Loyalty without boundaries is just bondage. And some of us are loyal to people who will never do the same for you. You keep pouring into cups that spit back at you. You keep giving access to people who only show up when they need something. You keep showing up for people who can't even pronounce your emotional needs. And when somebody finally says you don't owe them that, you flinch, you get mad. Because part of you still believes that being a good woman means being a self sacrificing woman. That's what we're taught, right? A woman sacrifices everything. She sacrifices herself for her family. She sacrifices herself for her husband, her children, her job, and whatever scraps are left is what belongs to her, right? But who told you that your healing has to come second to someone else's comfort? Who told you that your freedom requires permission? It doesn't. Now, let's talk about how loyalty is used as a weapon in our communities, especially in Black and Brown families, right? I know if you're listening to this, you've probably heard, don't talk about what happens in this house. What happens in this house stays in this house. Or that's still your daddy. That's still your uncle. That's blood, right? They've done so much for you. You can't turn your back on your family. And let's call that what it is. It's called emotional blackmail. We are trained to call silence respect. We're trained to call self abandonment love. We're trained to call trauma bonding loyalty. But what it really is manipulation. Some of us were told to protect abusers to keep the family together. Some of us were taught to stay silent when so the community won't look bad. We were told to bite the image of people who broke us. You're not disloyal for choosing your peace. You are not wrong for telling your story. You are not selfish for walking away. Your healing is not a betrayal, it's actually a revolution. So, if this is hitting something in you, if your stomach is in knots, if your chest feels tight, it's probably because you've been carrying guilt that was never yours to hold. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't have to keep showing up in spaces that require you to shrink. You don't have to carry the emotional weight of people who refuse to grow with you. So, as we continue talking about why healing can feel lonely, we're going to talk about how your standards shift when you start healing and what it means to redefine your cycle. Because once you let go of guilt, you make space for alignment, and alignment is key as we heal. Alignment doesn't feel like pressure, it feels like peace. Okay. When you raise your standards, your peace, your energy, your time, everything and everyone not aligned with that new frequency will start to fall away. And that is not punishment, that is protection. Because one of the hardest parts of healing is realizing that people you used to call your tribe were only comfortable with the version of you who was constantly shrinking, constantly sacrificing, constantly self silencing. You used to tolerate the group chats full of gossip because you didn't want to be too sensitive, right? You used to laugh at jokes that made you feel small just to keep the peace. You used to keep showing up even when your gut was screaming, this doesn't feel safe anymore. But now you're not laughing, you're not replying, you're not showing up just to prove loyalty to people who never earned it. And suddenly you're the changed one. But here's what's actually happening. You're not better than anyone. You're just done pretending that dysfunction is normal. When you stop entertaining what you've outgrown, people will start to guilt you for choosing peace. And my advice to you is let them. You probably have been a safe space for people who didn't even know what safety felt like. You've been the unpaid therapist. You've probably been the emotional crutch, the ride or die, the peacemaker, the over explainer. And mostly because you wanted connection. You but what you end up doing is settling for attachment. And attachment says, don't leave me because I'll become whatever you need. And connection is, here I am, my whole self, meet me here. But the problem is, we're not taught to build connection, we're taught how to perform for approval. But now, as you're healing, your standards are changing. You're no longer available for one sided relationships or trauma bonding or fake peace. And yes, it feels lonely at first because the silence left by walking away from your old patterns is often loud. But that silence is sacred. It's a space where true connection can be built. And again, connection is, here I am, my whole self. Meet me here. Oftentimes, when we start healing, we start seeking community. And I really want to just spend some time talking about what community actually is and what it is not. Community is not the friend who only calls you in crisis. It's not the group that mocks your boundaries or rolls their eyes when you talk about growth. It's not the people who gaslight your healing because it makes them uncomfortable. That's not community, that's codependency. Real community helps you hold yourself accountable. And it holds space for your softness because oftentimes, when we have been through trauma, we are hard on the exterior and we don't know how to step into our softness. But real community helps us hold space for our softness. Real community respects our boundaries without needing a PowerPoint presentation to explain it. Real community cheers for you even when you glow up, reminds them of what they haven't done yet. If your circle only claps for the version of you that stays small, listen, that's not a circle, that's a cage. And I often encourage people to reframe their thoughts out loud. Like, I am allowed to desire connection that doesn't require self-abandonment, right? I want you to say that as you're listening to this. I am allowed to desire connection that doesn't require self abandonment. And a lot of what we learn and the way that we're conditioned to interact with people really is self abandonment. It's putting everyone else first before we focus on ourselves. And your nervous system has to believe that self abandonment is no longer your priority. So you need to start saying no with your chest. You need to stop explaining yourself to people who have committed to misunderstanding you. You have to stop ghosting your needs to accommodate people who never ask how you're really doing. You honestly get to be picky with your time, with your energy, with who gets access to you. That does not mean that you're being mean. This is maintenance. This is stewardship. This is growth. And as you focus on yourself, as you prioritize yourself and prioritize making sure that you are not self abandoning yourself, this is when you start to realize that you don't owe access to people just because you share history. You don't have to keep dead friendships on life support. You don't have to be the strong one just because it makes other people feel secure. And I want you to go back to your notes and write down this question and go back and journal around it later. Where am I still confusing loyalty with obligation? That's the first question. Where am I still confusing loyalty with obligation? Second question, what relationships make me feel heavy after every interaction? Where do I still flinch when I imagine telling the truth about what I need? Those are the places that you need to explore so that as you step into your healing even more, as you step into prioritizing yourself, you step into your new standard. These are the relationships or the interactions that you probably first need to address. If peace isn't present, it's not aligned. If you have to explain your worth over and over, that's not your space. If you feel more like a therapist than a friend, then it's not mutual. Let people opt out of your growth. You don't have to carry the dead weight into your next season. Because here's the thing, you're not walking away from them, you're walking back to yourself. So let's talk about what happens when you finally make that shift from surviving to healing, from tolerating to choosing, from guilt driven relationship to soul nurturing connections. And I'll be honest with you, this part this part hurts the most and heals the deepest because nobody talks enough about what it actually takes to let go without blowing up everything, without going back to explain your growth, without begging people to understand the version of you that no longer dims herself to be digestible. So what that shift really means is not waking up one day and cutting everybody off with a slick post protect your peace post. It's not about ghosting people and pretending like you were never affected. The shift is subtle at first. You stop initiating, you stop overgiving, you stop shrinking to keep the room comfortable. And before you know it, the dynamics change, right? Most people will not like the healed version of you. That's the truth. Because that version has boundaries. And people love people who don't have boundaries. That version of you says no without an apology. That version doesn't exist to meet everyone's emotional needs while neglecting your own. So, yes, some relationships will crumble at the start. And that's okay because what's really crumbling is the unspoken contract you signed with your silence. When you are in survival mode, you attract people who benefit from your wounds. They get used to the version of you that never asks for anything back, always holds it down, shows up even when empty. Survival mode makes you a giver, a fixer, a listener, the one who has it all together. But as you heal, those roles start to suffocate you. And when you stop performing those roles, people will think, you know, you're too big for your britches. And maybe they're right. Maybe you changed because you had to. You got tired of carrying the relationships that you were the only one doing the emotional labor. But let me be clear, you do not owe everyone a front seat to your healing. You are allowed to release people silently. You're allowed to outgrow connections without dramatic exit speech. Like, you don't have to let them know. You're allowed to hold compassion and distance at the same time. I like this live is really, if you haven't given it to yourself, it's your permission slip. You do not have to explain your growth to people who have benefited from your silence. But before we get petty, before we get dismissive, I want to just get real for a second. There was a version of you that needed those people, right? At one point in time, they served a role in your life. They held space for you when no one else did. You trauma bonded, sure, but you also survived together. There was love, even if it was laced with pain. And that version of you deserves a thank you, not shame, not regret, just gratitude. You got through that chapter, but now you're writing a new one. And that's all really. Sadie, go ahead, please. Yeah. So detachment doesn't mean bitterness. One second, Sadie. Detachment doesn't mean bitterness. It doesn't mean building a wall so tall that no one gets in. What it really means is learning to let people who are there. No, it's about letting people be who they are without needing to change them. It's about releasing resentment without needing revenge, or grieving the relationship without guilt. It's choosing peace even when your trauma wants to spin a story. It's about regulating your nervous system when the urge to fix kicks in. It's about not taxing just because you're lonely. It's sitting in the void and realizing that it's not emptiness, it's space. And it's space for something new, it's space for something or someone aligned. It's space for the version of you who no longer needs to settle for pain disguised as connection. Sometimes, we think that we are being a villain for walking away. We are being mean and nasty by ending relationships that we've had for a long time. And I want to reframe that. I am not a villain for walking away. I'm a hero for choosing me. And oftentimes we end up in survival mode because we don't know how to choose us. We don't know how to do that. Right? So, yes, we are a hero for walking away from the relationships that no longer serve us, walking away from the situations that no longer bring us fulfillment, walking away from everything that's no longer aligned with us. So, again, just a few more questions that I want you to ruminate on, perhaps write them down again. Who am I still holding on to because I feel guilty? What connection am I afraid to release because I don't want to be alone? And where am I still trying to explain my worth? These questions aren't here to shame you. And as I say, I really want you to go through these. And these are spaces, whatever comes up as you start to explore these are spaces that you probably need to re examine as you heal, right? If you are still having to explain your worth to someone or circumstances, why are you still there? And that's a question for you and not the other people involved, right? Like, you really had to get to the root of why are you still there. And oftentimes the root of why we're still there is history. It feels comfortable. That's my norm. But a huge part of our growing and healing is being able to rewrite that, being able to change what we consider normal, right? Because like when we're in survival mode, fight and flight and chaos is normal to us. When we heal, we shouldn't be in an extended state of fight and flight. Yes, we might have to fight or flight at some point in time, but not extendedly. So we're having to learn new things. We're having to learn how to rephrase and reprogram the beliefs that we have about ourselves as we heal. And as we do that, hopefully our healing is really amplifying our worth. So we shouldn't be explaining that to somebody, right? Once we know our worth, we should not have to explain it. It speaks for itself. But of course, this gets rough, right? Like, and I want to emphasize to you that healing does not have to be done alone. If you're sitting here and like it's all hidden a nerve, good. Because it means your soul is ready for the truth. You don't have to figure this all out alone. And that's one of the reasons why I created the survival mode Exodus membership. It's a space where you don't have to explain your trauma, right? You don't have to prove your worth to be supported. You don't have to shrink to belong. Inside this membership, we're not just healing in theory, we're practicing it, we're embodying it, we're building new circles based on truth and safety and liberation. So if you have been doing the work and still feeling like no one gets it, this space was meant for you. You can either scan the QR code on the screen or drop Exodus in the comments, and I will reach out to you with more details because healing is not a journey that has to be lonely. It's a journey where you can recreate yourself, where you can expand your tribe and get to know new things about yourself with so much grace and so much appreciation. So, thank you for joining me live. Thank you for joining this conversation. As I've said before, my aim is to go live weekly on Sundays around this same time. And if I do have the space, I will hop on live on Wednesdays. Those will be unplanned, but the ones on Sunday, I will give the content ahead of time. If you have enjoyed this or you're catching this later, just drop a message in the chat so that I can come back and answer you. And again, thank you for your time. I just want to remind you, you were not built to break, but you damn sure were not built to just survive. So disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. And I will see you